Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. You know what's crazy? So they're playing Norway chess, the Blitz portion they played so far today. And it's really interesting because I literally just did, and it was completely at random. I just went through and tried to find a game between Magnus Carlsen and Wesley So. And so I literally just did a video of them yesterday. Didn't do that great, but I just thought it was really crazy that they played today. And I was like, wow, like, I literally just did this. I was like, I might as well just do it again. I always think it's pretty hot when Magnus Carlsen plays Wesley So. They're two very popular, famous players. So it's always nice to see them go back and forth. And this is an actually really funny game between Magnus Carlsen and Wesley So. Magnus is kind of doing a little bit of trolling. This is a Blitz game. So as you can imagine, when you get into Blitz and Bullet, I mean, the moves can be pretty crazy. And so this is a perfect example of that. But for all of my people that are in the Philippines, I will say mabuhay. Kamusta na aking makaibigan. Let me see. Masaya ako makita kang muli. Maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking my video. I appreciate you guys very much for coming by and taking a look at my stuff. Magandang umaga to you. It is 6 a.m. So, you know, maybe some people are up. But anybody who is coming from Norway, I will say God morgen to you. And tusen tak. I appreciate you guys very much for coming by and taking a look at my stuff. But yeah, if you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we got for this game. So we got A4. All right. Like I said, it's a very comical game. You know, Magnus Carlsen, he's literally played everything in the world. He's played H4, he played H4 against Ware like a little while back. You know, he's played F3, you know, the Bond Cloud. He's done the little shuffle of all. He's literally played everything you could possibly imagine. And somehow he's able to just still play really great games of chess. The only thing about when you play this crazy stuff, at some point you do have to start playing normal moves, because if you don't, and you just keep playing whatever you want, you're just going to just pretty much lose. These players are too strong to be just continuously playing bad moves against. So you'll see that Magnus Carlsen does play. He starts to play more normal. And this opening is called the Ware opening. I'm not sure who it's named after, but that's just the name of it. But as you guys will see coming up, we do get into a very normal position. Because you guys do know that whenever you are playing games as white, you know, there are a lot of positions where A4 is actually a legitimate move. So it's not too crazy. So we do see knight to F6, and then we do have knight to F3, and we have transposed into a Reti with just kind of like a weird looking A4 move. But as I said, as you kind of go on more and more, you know, you'll notice that it'll start to resemble more of a Reti type of position. Because like I said, you have to get into something normal. So we do see G6, we got G3, bishop to G7, bishop to G2, castles, and then D4. And I mean, you guys are seeing it does still look kind of weird on the A file, but you know, like it's starting to resemble more of a regular chess position. So we do see D5. We got castles by white. We got C5, just trying to, you know, break apart white's center, or supposed to be center after the E pawn moves. But pawn takes C5. We do see knight to A6, which is a very normal way for black to recover that pawn on C5. We see knight to C3, knight takes C5, a bishop to E3. So, I mean, even though you have made the A4 move, which doesn't necessarily really waste the tempo, you know, you do have, you know, pretty much all your pieces developed, and the queen just needs to move, and we pretty much have, you know, a pretty nice position for white. As you can see, you know, it's still fairly even. Black has like a slight edge, and that's pretty much just because white kind of gave away the initiative a little bit by playing A4. But you know, both sides are doing fairly well. So we do see B6. We got A5. And now the A pawn is serving a real purpose. It's looking at trying to break up this structure here. And of course, if the queen takes back, I mean, you have some nasties right here after knight to A4 because it is pinned. So, I mean, you do kind of have to be a little careful in this position. As you can see, it's fairly even. So we do see bishop to B7. We see bishop to D4, discouraging the move E5. And then we do see the novelty of the game, which is E6. When you first started the game, you did get to a point where it looks like the novelty was at like move 4. But, you know, once, like I said, once we started getting more into normal play, we kind of bounced back into some positions that had been known before. But we do see E6. And so this is the novelty of the game here. We do see rook up to a3. And like I said, I mean, moving that a pawn has served a little purpose because we are getting a rook lift. It's not the most crazy rook lift in the world, but I mean, it's still something. So we do see queen to e7. We got queen over to a1 because we're just trying to just completely own this a file 100%. Can I get an arrow? Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so knight c goes to d7. That's not something you say very often. We do see knight up to e5. And knight takes e5, bishop takes e5. We got bishop to c6. We see pawn takes b6, pawn takes b6, rook takes a8, rook takes a8. And of course, we can't take back on a8 because we do have the bishop protecting. So we're going to need to do something else with the queen. So the queen does sidestep over to d1. We see bishop back to f8. We got queen to d3. And like I said, I mean, you know, the position is like pretty completely equal. You know, there are no more pawns on the A file. So, you know, the tempo that Magnus Carlsen did kind of give away a little bit at the beginning of the game has pretty much come back to him. And then we just see a completely normal position. And if anything, white actually has a nice position as far as pawn structure is concerned because, you know, they do have this isolated pawn here for black. So it's a little bit better for white. So we do see knight back to d7. We got bishop to d4. We see queen down to b4. You know, of course, like, let's attack this pawn. But you got to be careful because that bishop is looking through. So the computer actually suggests going just rook to d1, not caring about the pawn. Because, of course, if the pawn is captured, you know, you have some nice discoveries here with knight takes d5. And you're going to get your pawn back, so you're good. But we do see rook over to b1. We see rook over to c8. We see knight down to d1. You know, we're thinking of either playing bishop here or playing pawn here, you know, whatever you prefer. But we have actually reached a point in the game that if you do want to pause the video and see what move Wesley So plays here, it's really a nice one. Go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So for those of you that noticed that this pawn is a little bit loose through this bishop, you just have to try to knock the queen somewhere because at the moment, the queen is holding. But you guys see that the queen doesn't have very many squares to go to. It can't go to d2 because, of course, that's just like completely capturable. So the move in this position is the nice bishop to b5. And this is going to dislodge this queen from this square and basically undefend this pawn. So on top of looking for undefended pieces in somebody's position, you want to look for underdefended pieces and see if there's a way that maybe you can start to knock that piece away, deflect the piece away from the protection of that piece. That's a little bit deeper, you know, in the calculation and stuff like that. So, you know, you got at least a move here. But after we see bishop to b5, the queen doesn't have very many places it can go. So we do see queen over to e3, and then we do see rook takes c2. And Magnus thinks that he's going to be probably trapping the bishop or trapping the rook after bishop to c3. But, you know, you have a really nice sidestepper move, queen to c5. And, of course, if you trade here, the bishop is going to take back and you have like some monster bishops on, you know, eyeballing your king. So we do see bishop down to f1. And like I said before, with taking on c5, you definitely don't want to take here because the knight is going to be taking and you have just allowed a tempo on your rook. And now you're going to have to give up the exchange. So, you know, not every trade is created equal. You have to be very careful when you're trading what you are giving your opponent. But we do see e5 in the position. Super logical. You know, we have a nice pawn center, so let's go ahead and start rolling that down. So the queen does take on c5. Of course, you have to do something because, you know, you were looking at d4, forking your bishop and your queen, so something had to give. So bishop takes c5, and you see the bishops that I'm talking about. They're literally slicing right through the position. So we do see e3. Bishop takes f1. We see king taking f1. We see d4. And, I mean, you know, Wesley So was just kind of relentlessly attacking, you know, Magnus Carlsen at this point. And if you notice, he is up a pawn. So, you know, he does have the pawn, but he is in a much better position than Magnus Carlsen. Pawn takes d4, pawn takes d4, and then we're just having to push our pieces back even more. And as you guys can see, we literally have all of our major minor pieces on the first rank, which is not what you want to have your pieces. You don't want to have your pieces back here. We see the bishop and the rook and the knight are all like at least a little bit further forward. And we have this nice completely passed pawn in the center of the board. So everything is just pointing to Wesley So's direction. The knight comes down to e5. We see b4, trying to get some space and breathe a little bit. We do see bishop up to d6. Rook comes up to b3. We see rook down to c1. Knight comes to b2. We see d3. Really running with this pawn. So knight takes on d3, knight takes on d3, and it is actually in this position that Magnus Carlsen does resign the game. He really just doesn't like what he sees, and you can see if you guys watch the video, he's just kind of like, I'm just going to go ahead and resign. And some of you guys might be looking, okay, well, you know, everything is equal. I mean, you know, like white and black both have the same amount of pawns. You know, it doesn't look like it's too horribly bad. I mean, you know, the rook is about to take right here, right? Well, I will show you guys, like, you know, as you guys can see, black is in a much better position, but I'll show you guys exactly why. So like I said, this is the position that we ended the game. But if we go forward, of course, Magnus is going to take this knight. But then Wesley So is able to take this bishop. And the problem is you do have this rook and this bishop you know, really heavy on this this bishop. So you're going to have to go rook to e3. You know, there are some different concepts that I'll mention that are coming up. The king would come down to g7. The rook could come up to e4 to attack the bishop, but the bishop would just retreat, going back to a5. The rook would come down to e3 because you have to maintain this this rank, this file. So you really don't have a whole lot of moves you can make with that rook. So you just kind of have to go back and forth. The king will go to f6. We would see f3. Rook would take e1. Rook would take e1. Bishop would take e1. King would take e1. And then we would have king to e5. And a few things I'll mention. I'm not going to go super into detail about it. But, I mean, this king is far superior than this king. This king has basically made its way all the way from the end, all the way to the center of the board. That is one thing. So black's king is far superior than white's king. You also have this outside pass pawn that is really far away from, you know, the center of the board. So basically, you have to deal with what is called the square of the pawn for this pawn, because as of right now, it is 6 squares away from queening. So the square is right here. But as that pawn moves down the board, the square gets smaller and smaller. So if we do, let's say we come up here like this, when we go to this, now the square is here. So the problem is, you know, this king doesn't really have a whole lot of place that it can go to in this side of the board. It has to kind of like hang out over here to make sure that this pawn doesn't, you know, score a touchdown. You know, at any point, you could just keep pushing this pawn and deflect this king over here. And then, you know, black's king can literally just come over here. Not there, of course, but come over here and just literally start munching pawns. Not in that order, but you see what I mean. You know, once this pawn starts to roll over, the king just has to keep being, you can even do something like this, and you know, you're just completely just winning the game. This king is going to start coming under, and you're just going to clear out all the white's pawns, and then you'll have the 3 of your own, because this white king is much slower. So you know, there are so many different ways from this position that we have that black has the ability to win. This is clearly something that Magnus Carlsen was able to calculate from where he was at, that this was going to be, you know, where we were going to end up. So he didn't want any more of that. So for this one, Malaka C. Wesley. So that is a nice game. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I haven't looked at everything in detail, but I believe he is actually leading the tournament at the moment. So at least the Blitz section so far. So we will see what happens in the coming days. But I appreciate you guys very much. Maraming salamat, aking makaibigan. Tusen tak for anybody who is coming from Norway. And I will see everybody next time.